Live Now. I'm Austin Westfall. We've got some file footage, as we call it, of Kim Jong Un meeting with President Trump in the past. Our next story brings us to North Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong Un, yesterday, appearing to acknowledge for the first time that the troops that he sent to fight in Ukraine for Russian President Vladimir Putin have suffered losses en masse. Reports say that Kim appeared tearful as he attended a recent ceremony depicting the faces of 100 North Korean soldiers who died in the battle. Host of the Strat podcast, Hal Kempfer, is still here. Hal, it's no secret that North Korea is very secretive. What's the significance of Kim making such an acknowledgement?
Austin, this is a really big change. You know, if you recall when North Korea started sending the troops in there, they basically had developed essentially almost a cover story, denying that they were going in there and stuff. You know, video was leaking out showing North Korean troops picking up Russian military gear. They were trying to pretend that the North Koreans were not actually there fighting on behalf of the Russians. In fact, Kim himself said that if a North Korean soldier was captured, that they would kill his family, and part of that was to incentivize North Korean soldiers not to surrender and also to, die in order to avoid being captured because their families back home would be killed. So let's just say it was a pretty onerous program to hide the fact that North Korean soldiers were fighting in Ukraine or fighting in Russia in the Kursk Oblast on behalf of Russia against Ukrainian forces. And this is a complete switch. He did this massive ceremony. He heaped honors and praise upon those who had died in battle. He had soldiers that just come back from North Korea come up to him, and he was, lauding recognition onto him. One North Korean soldier actually broke down in tears and started crying in his shoulder, and he gave him a big hug. This is very, very different from anything I've ever seen in North Korea. Kim Jong Un and certainly his father and his grandfather, I don't recall them ever doing something quite like this. And all you can conclude from this is kind of the assessment you just put out there or had talked about, which is they can't hide the number of casualties. And they sent 11,000 out there. They're supposed to be sending or are sending 30,000 out there. The Russians are using North Koreans as cannon fodder, so there's going to be a ton more come back dead, a lot more come back seriously maimed and injured. He can't hide that anymore, so he's going to go the other way and laud great praise and honors and recognition on them in order to dissipate what will obviously be a pretty hard hit on North Korean society.
So one thing that I find fascinating is he acknowledged 100 deaths. Hal, you've alluded to this, but do we take that at face value?
Not even close. I think it's somewhere between 4,000 to 6,000, maybe even more. In fact, when they went in there, the North Korean troops were just getting chewed up. There was 11,000 in there. I think they said at the loss rate, that within 3 or 4 months of deployment, unless something dramatically changed, that all of them were going to be dead. And that did dramatically change. They pulled the North Korean forces back from the front lines because they were losing them so fast. And then they would kind of use them, but they wouldn't use them quite en masse like they were. But and they're very secretive about what the exact numbers are, but it's thousands and thousands. And with 30,000 going in, and certainly with this new public embrace of their, bravery or whatever you want to call it, their dedication to country and everything, that I'm anticipating they're going to be using them as cannon fodder, essentially, on the front lines, and they're going to take horrendous casualties, just like the Russians are taking horrendous casualties. The Russians are losing about 1,000 troops a day on the front lines, and I imagine the North Koreans, depending on how they're being employed, could actually, as a relative percentage, could be bigger than the Russian losses. So that's kind of, and they've been using them in the Kursk Oblast, but I don't know where they're planning on using the new North Korean troops. They could be thrown in anywhere. And you got to remember, Russia's in the middle of this big, massive summer offensive, not making a lot of progress, a little progress, but not much, but they are taking horrendous losses.
So the video that we've been looking at on the screen is Kim meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. I got to ask you, Hal. Kim first acknowledged that he sent thousands of troops to fight for Putin in Ukraine back in April. Where were, and again, you have alluded to this already, but if you could expand on it, where were these soldiers sent? And back then, was it understood that the North Koreans likely would take some losses?
I think it was pretty much understood. It took a while before Kim to really acknowledge anything. And where they initially went, mostly, if you recall, the Ukrainians made that big push up into Kursk Oblast. And for those not familiar, that's the northern part of Ukraine, and that is a Russian province or oblast. So they made this big push up into this area of Russia, and they held it for quite some time. And the North Koreans, who were there to defend Russia, were primarily used in, not exclusively, but used primarily in Kursk Oblast, defending Russian territory. And it looked like there was a little bit of legal logic, if you will, that they are defending Russian soil. They're not actually part of the invasion onto Ukrainian soil. I don't think anybody really cares between Kim Jong Un and Putin, but there did seem to be a little bit of that that kind of insinuation, if you will, in terms of how they were used. They were taking horrendous losses. They were pulled back, but that was also about the time that you started to see the Russians using those fiber optic drones on the battlefield, first-person view fiber optic drones. And really, that's what shifted that battle the fastest, was the massive use of fiber optic drones on the battlefield, which Ukraine wasn't really prepared to defend against. I don't think either side are prepared to really defend against that innovation quite yet. And so that moved things lopsidedly against the Ukrainians in Kursk, and they had to pull back. But a lot of North Korean losses, and I'm anticipating a lot more North Korean losses. Where they'll keep them on Russian soil is a good question. I have a feeling at this point they don't really care, and they're going to probably send the North Koreans in to fight on Ukrainian territory. But we'll see what comes out of it. But that's a logical inference.
Remind us, does North Korea usually send troops to foreign wars? Is this a novel concept?
For them, it's a very novel concept. They're pretty much they fight. Their whole thing is in North Korea. In fact, just yesterday they were firing across the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, that separates South Korea and North Korea again. They've been doing that. They do these things on a regular basis. They will do patrols, attacks along the DMZ. Yes, it is a violation of the truce, but they do stuff like that, and they did it yesterday again. Interestingly, at the same time, the president of South Korea, the new president, is trying to reimpose some of those same agreements they had with North Korea that kind of fell apart over the last year, where they were trying to reduce tensions between the two countries. And so he's trying to actually put some of those things back in place. But we'll see how successful that is. He's doing that. And at the same time, North Korea's got troops firing across the demilitarized zone, the DMZ, at South Korean troops. And so there's definitely a mixed message in terms of what's happening there.
All right. That's enough for the Russia-Ukraine war and the North Korean angle to that. Hal and I want to discuss Gaza next. Specifically, Hal, what I want to ask you about is Israel's defense minister. He warned about the possible upcoming destruction of Gaza City. Of course, we have been watching Gaza closely as the IDF has been moving closer to taking full control of the biggest city in the enclave. We do need to take a quick commercial break. Hal and I